1973, Florida resident Jim Spink claimed to have begun habituating a Sasquatch. Take it as you will. Here's part 2 of 4 of his story. Please support this channel by subscribing and leaving comments. Stay well, stay safe.
Now, I'd known that ficus tree had come into fruit because the raccoons were climbing up there every night for the last 2 nights and going through a feeding frenzy on those figs. What did I know? Because I was in the habit of climbing up the tree to sit on that little perch at the top, watch the birds, and watch the world go by, and watch the thunderstorms come across in the evening, I saw their scats on these big horizontal branches of this tree every day. Didn't think anything of it. I mean, who wants a pile of poop to play with? So, being like the other mornings, I decided, well, what the heck? So I walked down, because I was kind of curious anyway, were there footprints over by that tree, like the very first time we came here? Nothing. So I thought, well, maybe I should go up and take a look around. And I started up the tree, and what should I discover on one of these large horizontal branches but something that didn't belong here? There was a scat specimen, 1 inch in diameter and 12 inches long, plus some pieces. Now, I've been watching these raccoons for the last couple of days or so anyway, but also I knew just from growing up in Florida, but having been born up north, that there's a big difference between the size of animals. It's like up north, North America here, you can get raccoons 40 pounds, and that's a big coon, but that's not really that unusual. Down in Florida, you get a 12-pound raccoon, and that's a big coon. Well, needless to say, they can only crap just so much at a time. And wild animals that are eating a lot of fibrous material, they eliminate quite often too. So they don't hold a lot at any given time. Especially the smaller they are, the less they hold. And it's true that a snake can put out a large scat, but what they eat is completely different. They don't go for berries and fruits. And here was this scat specimen, and it was humongous in comparison. So I climbed down and ran back to my tent, and I got my camera and my measuring scale, and a pan and so forth, and I photographed everything, then very carefully removed it, measured everything, put it on my gram scale and weighed it, took a portion of it to check for parasites through a flotation test, because I'd studied this stuff, and I brought some of this stuff with me from the college. I borrowed it, you know. I mean, I didn't have bucks to buy this stuff. That was okay. At least I had something to start with. So I went through the process of examining this. I weighed it wet, and then I dried it out, and I weighed it dry. Then I would take it apart and look for the different kinds of things in it. Because how else are you going to know what they eat? Well, it was not bad business. It didn't stink like you'd typically think it would, because in this case it was filled with these figs, which are mostly seeds anyway. And that night I had my tape recorder ready, and sure enough they came again. Because I finally put 2 and 2 together and figured out that from this, they were coming to that tree to feed. Now, what I didn't know right away was that there were 2 items they were looking for: the figs in that tree and the raccoons. So I made all my measurements and weights and everything and logged it in my diaries. I had separate diaries for the weather and for my meals and for observations and for specimens and so forth. Very primitive, but fairly well for somebody who didn't know what they were doing. At least I thought so. So I spent the day looking around and see if I could find some uprooted trees or any devastation. And, well, I was rather disappointed. But I was relieved, too. We didn't have a rampaging monster from out of my childhood loose on the island. But come dark, you can believe I was in my tent before the sun set. One, of course, just to get a chance to kill the mosquitoes that would come in with me. But there was no way I was going to be outside if it was going to be there. And for a flashlight to write by, because I was ready this time. I was going to take notes. I was going to make tape recordings, whatever I could do, while I sat inside and trembled. So for a flashlight, what I decided to use was my LED watch. A white light would be so bright inside a tent in such a dark area, just ludicrous. So I just squeezed the watch and it would come on for a couple of seconds. I would write and so forth. So I had an idea. I had a method now for taking notes in the dark. And sure enough, come 10, 11 o'clock, whatever it might have been, it showed up and made this chattering sound. The raccoons were just as busy as can be. Come sunset, we're already up in the tree and eating away. They hit with this chittering sound, this nervous chittering sound. Now I surmised that it had been gone quite a while, because I'd been there for a month, and didn't expect anything like my tent to be there. So it was rather nervous at this intrusion in this area. Whether it considered it its territory or not, who's to say? Well, it made it to the tree, and the raccoons started to go berserk. Now, at this particular time, there were about 5 coons on the island. There was an adult male and a female, and an adolescent and 2 babies. She had had 2 kits, and all of them were up on this tree gorging themselves, and Bigfoot shows up. And they start going crazy. I mean, literally crazy. I tried to record it, but my little $10 tape recorder wasn't going to do much with a $2 microphone. So I just listened, and I took notes. What time, the temperature, what I thought was going on, etc. Couldn't see in the dark anyway, but I knew where the tree was, so I knew where they were relative to the tree, and where the raccoons were was pretty obvious. They were up in the tree. And for the next 5 nights, totaling 6 nights, this same scenario would unfold. Because the following morning I'd go to the tree, and sure enough I'd find a large scat. And it was kind of interesting that almost always it was up in the tree. And yet it makes kind of sense. That's where they were feeding. And since it's mostly fiber, it doesn't have a whole lot of nutritional value. It's not juicy. These ficus are very dry. Almost all of it would pass through the system immediately, or at least the night before would pass for sure. So while they were eating, they'd be eliminating too. So each morning I'd get specimens, but each evening they'd do this same with these raccoons. Well, what I soon discovered also after a couple of nights was there was more than one. And one night, 3 of them showed up, and you could hear their different voices. Masculine, feminine, however you want to say it, higher and lower, etc. You could hear them in different positions around the tree. They weren't all standing in the same spot. And you could tell by the reaction of the raccoons, who were definitely going out of their minds, that someone wanted some dinner, and they wanted it to be meat. And sure enough, after about an hour of these raccoons running back and forth up and down these branches and crying the whole time, one of them decided to jump out of the tree. Well, one of the big feet was in that area, that side or quadrant, however you want to describe it, and gave chase. Well, it got away. And yet, after that 6 days, and everything was quiet again, no sounds, no motions, no footprints, no scat, no nothing, I did find a skeleton at the base, on the ground, of a Bursura maruba, a gumbo limbo tree. It had its neck snapped, the spine was twisted, there was no meat, though some of the fur was still there. So one of those raccoons did not get away. And here I am back to waiting again. They were just gone. Nothing. It was twiddle your thumbs time again. And I went exploring, and I hunted around the island high and low, trying to find where had they been, what traces had they left, you name it. And there wasn't much. All the lowlands are mangroves, and every time the high tide comes in, it fills with water. So if there had been any footprints, they're gone. And most of the dry ground is either brush, scrub, jungle, or it's shell, and most of the shell is very hard. There's almost no soil. And if you're in amongst the jungle, there's so much leaf drop from years and years and years, you wouldn't get any footprints there at all. You can just forget it. You're going to find lots of leaves, and that's it. So I spent the next several days just hunting for anything and didn't find much. But what are you going to do? You got nothing better to do. At any rate, I decided to go into town. Been several weeks. So I piled into my rowboat and headed back to the fishing village. And from the fishing village, it was another 13-mile drive to the nearest town to buy groceries. So when I got back that afternoon, the fisherman's son said, well, if you want, I'll run you down. You know, we'll just hitch up the boat and take you down because I'm going down that way anyway. And he was just kind of curious to see what I've been up to, you know, what the lay of the land was. So, all right, fine. Off we go. When we're within about a mile of the island, I noticed there's this smoke rising from the top of the island. And the fisherman's son wonders what's going on. There hadn't been any lightning or anything. So it's not a forest fire. So he scoots it up a little faster and gets into the lagoon, and we ground in the mud, and off we go up to the top of the mountain. Now, he was just going to leave me off. I said, but let's check this out. That smoke is not natural. So he follows me up, and sure enough, some treasure hunters had been out. They had taken a machete and chopped up everything in and about my tent, and then burned it to the ground. And there was just ashes. I found the machete marks on my binoculars, on my microscope, on everything. All my notes, whatever specimens, scat specimens, whatever I had, all gone. Well, if you've never experienced coming home and finding everything or just about everything you own in the world in ashes, I can tell you about it. It gives you kind of a sinking feeling inside. But for whatever reason, I'm kind of a strange character, I guess. I don't understand about quit. It doesn't compute for me. I was there for a reason, for a purpose. These people were there just for glory or for greed or however. I don't know. Their rationale is their own. But I had a specific reason. So I asked the fisherman's son to take me back. Couldn't stay there. The mosquitoes would be all over me before I knew it. I had only the clothes on my back. Some groceries. So, okay, he turned around and took me back. And I drove back to the town, and I had befriended a man who had a donut shop. So I went to see him, kind of crying my coffee. And it seems he had an old house trailer that was in a trailer park, but nobody was using. So he said, well, if you want, you can stay there. And I thanked him. I had no place else to go except my car. So I called my girlfriend back in Miami. And she'd gone on a bowling for dollars game on TV. I'd sent the card in with her name on it. We'd agreed if either one of us went on and won, we'd split it. Sure enough, she won. And my split was $600. And at that particular point, that $600 looked like $1 million. But I discovered the trick was getting it from her. Her mama didn't want to share it. and call after call after call, day after day, and she didn't want to bring me any of that money. Finally, she gave up, relented, I don't know what. I think all she wanted me to do was come home. But I had something to do. So she drove over to the Gulf Coast and brought me $300. Well, it wasn't a whole lot. Couldn't afford a tent with all the other stuff I needed. But I did find a jungle hammock that I could put up in that big tree. So after 4 or 5 days in town, I got some goods together, more groceries and everything, and back I went. And this time, I had to set this jungle hammock way up in this tree, 20 feet in the air. Now, I should imagine most folks have experienced being in a hammock, say about 2 feet off the ground. Well, it's not quite the same when you're dangling in space. It does have some advantages. The higher you go, the thinner the mosquitoes get. In this particular case, 20 feet just wasn't quite enough. Plus, when I climbed up that ladder, I had to then lean out over space backward, sit down into the hammock. Plus, once it rains, when you're inside and you're snug for the night and it decides to rain, it's just get wet. And the wind blows, it's rockabye baby. And is there any place to go? Absolutely not. And is your bladder going to bother you? Well, that's too bad. So there I was. Now, from the start, this was disaster. I mean, this was a #1 disaster. But at least I was back. I was doing something. So there I am, swinging in the breeze. And sure enough, they show back up. I don't know where they'd been, but they're back. And here I am trembling again. And I don't even dare roll over to look down because the ropes might squeak and they might know where I'm at and they might want to climb that tree after me. Yes. Exaggerated imagination? Yes. Fear? Yes. Cowardice. I qualify all of it. Who's to say? There were no guidebooks to tell you that they're benign, that they wouldn't harm a flea, well, maybe a raccoon. And I had no experience living alone in the middle of nowhere. I wasn't a wild man. And sure enough, here they are. And one night, 2 of them walk up in the jungle, and they come to the fringe of this big tree. The clearing around this tree is just grass. There's no bushes or anything growing underneath it. And they show up. And you can hear the 2 of them talking, and you hear the male and the female voices. One is higher pitched, one is lower, and they're having this conversation. And the gist of it was, well, you can go through the clearing and over to where that strange creature's camp is if you want, but I'm staying here in the jungle. Because that's what happened. The female then made a left turn and continued through the jungle around this big tree, and the male came out of the jungle, right into the clearing, walked right underneath me, and made a right turn on this trail over to where my tent was, and started kicking tin cans that I had left out. I would peel the paper off the can, holding just the rims, and throw it out, hoping they would pick it up and give me fingerprints. Well, the raccoons kind of squashed that idea, and the possums. But they were shiny enough to want to kick. Well, in the meantime, while this is going on, and I'm trembling up in this tree in the middle of the night, I hear a third one out in the bay. Now, we're talking 2,000 feet from where I'm at, down at the south end of the island, walking in the shallow flats, and you hear this where the shins are plowing through the water. And then I hear a thrashing sound in the water, silence, and then more thrashing, and then more walking. And I'm lying there and I'm grinning from ear to ear. Because what have I just heard? Not only have I verified 3 of them at the same moment on this island and where they are, but I have heard one walking in water, 2-legged, not 4. Fishing, no less. Must have been hunting for crabs or fish or something, and had no fear whatsoever of diving down into the water to get whatever it was looking for. Now, you go to any big zoo sometime and take a look, and you'll discover the monkeys are on little islands with moats of water around them. And why? They don't like going in the water. Oh, there are a few, like the Japanese macaque, but otherwise, they don't like water. So here is Bigfoot walking out in the bay fishing. I mean, try and imagine this. This is absolutely phenomenal. And the bipedality, this is not a deer. This is a man, or at least a man type. The monkeys don't go around on 2 legs. The gorillas don't go around on 2 legs. So I am experiencing something that nobody, at least in this fashion, had ever experienced. At least it went around talking about it. And I've got my little tape recorder trying its best, but it's generally good for about 12 inches. And it'll pick up something at 70 feet, but 2,000 feet, well, the moment a mosquito lands on it, you've just lost it all. That'll give you an idea. And I'm all of a sudden realizing that my so-called tragedy has been a blessing in disguise, because you see, where I'm at, I'm above the tops of all the trees on the island, except at the very top of the island. So I'm able to hear clearly anywhere on the island and around the island. And so because of this disaster, I have been blessed with this hearing of his fishing. Or her, who's to say? At any rate, I soon fell asleep. They were gone come morning, and the pattern seemed to be very simple. They would not show up until it was so late that they felt confident that I was asleep. Midnight, on average. Never, ever during the day. At least not while I was on the island. So this went on night after night, and I took notes with my little watch, and I tried to make recordings, and then I hunted during the day for footprints or broken branches or skeletons or anything I could find. And most of what I had lost, well, that was lost. And even a reporter got wind of it, had somebody bring him out to the island to do an article. So he did. He went home, wrote up a nice article in the St. Pete Times, made it sound like a Vietnam veteran ripping off the government. Well, it wasn't long. I got a letter saying, your benefits have been canceled. You can starve. Well, they didn't know I was going to starve because of it, but that was the basic effect of it. So, what was I going to do? I had to quit. Besides, I'd been writing to my teachers who were supposed to be my sponsors. They wouldn't even answer my letters. Needless to say, they didn't believe what I was doing anyway, but just out of simple courtesy. And maybe they'd sponsor me just to get me out of the classroom, too. Who's to say? Having been fresh back from Vietnam, I wasn't much for taking lip from anybody, at least as far as their being about the same age as me and telling me that they're superior. So maybe I had an attitude problem. But at any rate, I sure wasn't getting any cooperation. And when the money stopped, I had to stop. So all I could do was just collect up my belongings, get in the rowboat, and head home. Try and make sense out of what recordings I'd made, my notes, etc. So, come June, after 6 months, now I made it 3 semesters. I finally had to pack it in. I had found footprints. I'd found 4 different sizes of footprints. I'd had some hair, just a little bit, but that got burned in the fire, and the scat specimens got burned up, and the measurements, and so forth and so on. And the first month of diary, they were all gone. But I had something inside of me that was just so absolutely special. There was no way you could have bought this if you'd gone out shopping for it. So I went home. And the teachers basically didn't want to have anything to do with me. Well, my anthropology teacher did. He was most kind and supportive. He couldn't do anything official for us. Well, we're going to publish a paper or anything. No, that was rather absurd, but he did give me credit for my efforts in field studies. The writing professor, no, not satisfactory. And the nutrition teacher, flunked. There's no such thing as Bigfoot, so there's no way you could have kept track of what they ate. And I even went so far as to sue them in court, small claims court, for not holding up their end of the bargain. But it didn't do any good. And I was just frustrated anyway. When I finally got the snafu with the GI Bill thing straightened out, and they changed the rules then, and you couldn't do it full time. You had to have half your classes in the school itself, and that was the end of that. But at least I had my benefits back, and I could continue. And I tried to find a publisher, and nobody was interested. And I got interviewed on a couple of talk shows on the radio, and there was 1 or 2 articles in the paper, and one thing and another, but front page, section B, I'd get 1 postcard from a child. It's like a dead zone. Nobody wanted to hear it. And the anthropologists were the worst. I even had some that said, don't even come into my office. It was just amazing. It's like their world was going to crumble if they discussed this topic. That seemed like they would be the ones to talk to, and yet they were the last ones that were willing to talk. It was amazing. And being just a young guy anyway, what did I know? I didn't know about the pressures and scholarship and reputations and all that stuff. It didn't mean a thing to me. I was just trying to figure something out, and it was amazing what I was experiencing. So it was a matter of getting some stuff together again and trying again. Because everywhere I turned, everybody said no. Even the National Enquirer turned me down. I mean, when they do, you really hit the bottom of the ladder. So, a year went by, and I wanted to go in the worst way. I got sick the day I was supposed to go, and that was that. No way, couldn't go. So I had to forget it. So another year goes by, and I'm saving up dented cans from the back of grocery stores. For 6 months, I collected dented cans and sorted through them, making sure they weren't tainted. And I had to get a big little trailer, one that was big enough to haul all these cases of canned goods, but small enough to be towed by my little car, along with another tent and all that miscellaneous you've got to have. This time I took a propane stove, because that first trip it was all campfires. 3 times a day, rain or shine. And this time I was prepared to take enough water to stay at least a month, because now I knew how much it took. So I was ready again after 2 years, and back I went, bound and determined I was going to prove that what I experienced. And somebody's got to want to hear about it. Well, I made it back. Stayed 4 months. And I tried this and I tried that. I set up a camera, which is all I had, on a tripod in amongst bushes with a monofilament line going down the trail with a branch trigger across the trail. And I slept up in trees during the night with my camera and recorder, and I slipped out in the bushes and you name it. And I tried to put out a piece of fish or cans of food here.
Stay tuned for part 3 of Living with Bigfoot. If you're enjoying all this rare and unique content, please show your support by subscribing and leaving comments. Stay safe, stay well.